we come up with anything, over.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. I am one of your hosts, Tanner. I'll be joined, as usual, by Taylor, but we do also have a special returning champion guest to the show, Nick. So, how's it going, everybody?
Hello.
Pretty good. Still stuck here in Ohio. As good as you can be when you live in Ohio.
Ohio's not that bad. People on Twitter make it sound worse than it is.
That is true. It actually does get a lot of shit on Twitter.
It's fun to make fun of Ohio.
At least you're close to, I have to drive 8 hours to get anywhere, and I live in like one of the biggest cities in the state.
Northeast Ohio does suck. I want to be clear. Let's stay away from that. Like Southwest Ohio is really where it's at.
13 more weeks until college football starts. To kind of get down.
But fewer weeks until NCAA football comes back on PlayStation, and that is exciting.
That's very exciting. It's been a while since I played any video game, but that one did catch my attention.
Yeah, I'm pre-ordering that one because I'm dumb, but
well, that's cool.
Look at that seamless transition into a media check-in right there. We transitioned to media right away.
Yeah, I didn't even have to plan that one out. We have a fun story to get to, but before that, we can.
Is it fun?
See what else we've been up to. Well, it is. It's something very
interesting.
It's something kind of new for the show. I
guess it's fun if you're here. Like you want to hear
it. It's not fun like the way the one where the husband-wife musician team got to save everyone.
The Oceanos.
Yeah.
That is probably one of my favorite stories we've done.
And that was fun, I guess, only in retrospect, because like no one ended up dying. But
they should have left the captain on there.
Probably not at the time.
Really should have.
What else have we been up to in the lead up to this, aside from planning for an episode?
I have a unique one for me. I am reading a fiction book. That doesn't happen very often. Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. It is a horror novel, but like set in the Black Death, medieval France, post the Battle of Crécy. And it involves a knight, a priest, and like an 11-year-old girl. And it's really good. I don't know. It's not something I would normally read, but I've really enjoyed it. It's one of those that comes up a lot on like, what's the most like shocking or like scariest horror book you've read? And like, that's one that shows up on a lot of the lists, and it's really good. I like it.
I get like Bloodborne vibes from that description.
I had seen that book, and until you started talking about it, I didn't realize that it was a novel.
Yeah.
It was just a book about the Black Death. Because I hadn't read much about it.
I think the best thing I can say about it is that the dialogue is really good. And I feel like that's what takes me out of fiction so often, is there's so much bad dialogue written in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it feels very natural and all that. So it's good.
No cap. I think there's something wrong with these rats.
I guess for as much as my opinion matters, as I said, I am not by any means an expert in that genre. So I don't know. I would recommend picking it up, though.
It'd be pretty funny to go in expecting just a book about the Black Death and find yourself in this crazy novel.
It was really different than I thought it was.
It's like this guy I saw on Twitter who went into the zone of interest thinking it was a sci-fi movie. He came out of the theater like 1 p.m. He's like, my whole day is ruined.
Who could think of something so terrible?
How about you, Tanner? What you been up to?
There's been a bunch of new music releases that I'm mostly blanking on. A few weeks ago, new Ghostface Killer album was pretty good. Not my favorite, but it has all the usual suspects on it. What else? Gatecreeper put out a new album. I thought that was pretty good. Aside from that, reading wise, I've been juggling 2 books about the Siege of Malta. Still doing final preparations for that bonus episode. But I'm also reading a book by Susan Abulhawa called Against the Loveless World. I had read one of hers, I guess it was last year when I read Mornings in Jinnin. She's a Palestinian American author who writes about Palestine and the various other areas sort of impacted by the Palestinian diaspora. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool.
Her stuff is a good mix of they're very realistic in that they're a mix of, humor and heavier topics also.
Well, music wise, Knocked Loose just dropped a new album a few weeks ago. They're a band I'm really into.
Do I need to do like a Knocked Loose motherfucker sound drop?
Oh yeah, that would be dope.
Knocked loose, motherfucker!
I know they're kind of like all the rage right now, but they're super good. I fell in love with them when they put out an EP a couple of years ago. And it was like a concept EP about losing someone in a car crash, and it was just so well made. I've just been on the band since, and they just put out the album.
Knocked Loose is a band that I see on my Twitter feed a lot, but I've never listened to them.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of people have a hard time, and myself included, getting past the guy's vocals. You kind of have to get used to it. Very high pitched, very heady. People sometimes compare it to SpongeBob screaming, like in memes. Like, Gary! but I don't know. He puts a lot into it, man.
That just reminds me of like when I was first, because I didn't really get into like actively listen to metal until I was like in graduate school.
Okay.
And so like you start exploring, a lot of the bigger name bands you've heard of, Metallica and Slayer and all them. And I still like some of them. And I remember the first time trying to listen to Megadeth, and I was like, is this what the vocals sound like the whole time?
Yeah.
You're like, take me back to Saint Anger.
Oh,
People listen to
met.
this. Yeah, that's still a band that I just cannot listen to because of the vocals. It's just like,
Well, if anyone did want to check out Knock Loose, I'd recommend the song Where the Light Divides the Holler. It's the opening track of that EP, and you read along with the lyrics because you kind of have to develop an ear. It's good shit there. As far as books, I finally read Dune, which on like the fourth try, I had to use I had to do an audiobook to get to do it. Yeah, speaking of dialogue, Frank Herbert, it was not one of his strong suits, I don't think. There'll be things saying like, don't you think this plan that I, the great Varen Hardcoden, is great? And when you're reading it on the page, you're like, this is kind of stupid. But when you have like voice actors doing it, it's a little bit better.
Yeah, you can help. It helps it a little bit.
The movies help a lot as well, too.
I haven't seen the newest Dune movie.
It kicks ass.
I liked the first one.
I haven't seen either one of those yet, but at some point I will.
The first one is good. It's kind of slow, and then I was kind of mad at it when it was half a movie. I was like, I'd rather just have a 5-hour movie. I still kind of prefer that, I think, if they just put the one they just put out, but the newest one just kick ass. And finally, real quick, I for a change, am starting to read some nonfiction. I just got some books kind of pertinent to the podcast.
Is that a bird I see behind you?
I see a predator approaching behind you.
Yes, it's terrible. He's our parakeet. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He's our cockatiel.
Usually when an animal walks on screen in the background, it's a cat. One of these from a podcast.
I was wondering when you'd start to notice him. He's been there the whole time.
He's a very well-behaved cockatiel.
Yeah, he's 14 years old. He's an old man now.
So he should know how to behave by now.
We took him on because my wife's parents. He's been in her family since he was a baby, and then they moved and couldn't take him, and so we decided to take him rather than have a stranger, take him. He's probably got he could have 5 to 10 years left in him.
Wow,
So.
I had no idea they lived that long.
I didn't know they lived that long.
Yeah, they live 15 to 25 years.
It's like people who have those. What is it? Those. Is it the African gray parrot that lived they lived to be 50?
You gotta make plans for after you die when you have
That's wild.
I know people who have tortoises because those things live.
Oh yeah,
so long.
You have to will the animal a lot of times, and because they live so long, and also because they're so smart, they're kind of more like a roommate than a pet in a lot of ways. Anyway, though, I just got this book by David Gran called The Wager.
Nice.
It's about a shipwreck off of Chile. And it's written by the guy who did Killers of the Flower Moon.
I think that's probably my most almost started book that I've been looking at lately. I've almost started that 3 or 4 times. But
The Wager one?
Yeah. I keep thinking about it.
I think I have it somewhere, but I don't. It was probably one that I ordered when I was ordering just a flurry of shipwreck books, but I don't know.
Every time I get an Audible credit, I have it and I look at it and then something else catches my eye.
That one has some cannibalism involved?
I think
Is that
so. I haven't started
Some
it
light
yet,
cannibalism.
but it seems that it seems like some people go through a bad time,
Mm-hmm.
to put it mildly. And the other one is called Sailing the Graveyard Sea by Richard Snow, which is about the USS Summers and the U.S. Navy's only mutiny.
Interesting.
Cool.
So haven't started either of those yet. I've been working on other stuff, but I'm looking forward to getting into those.
Cool.
One other programming note I'll say is we just put out the third installment of Naughty Yachties. So that covers episodes 6 and 7 of season 1 of Below Deck. So that is available for $5 patrons on Patreon.
I
As
think
of
part 4
today.
will be the finale of that season. So, yeah.
Cool. We'll have that coming, next month, maybe?
Probably. Maybe. We'll see.
I'm not gonna lie, I was started to listen to it before I got the link, just to kind of get rid of some pre-show jitters. So let me go ahead and get used to it. I feel like I'm already there.
Practicing riffing along with the podcast.
Without it getting too weird or parasocial,
I think it's everything I've got. So this is an episode that Nick has put together here, a story that I definitely was not familiar with. Taylor, I don't think you were.
Not familiar with this one.
And it's got some fun. It's a good mix of, I think, old and new elements for the show. Some things that sound familiar and some new aspects to it.
I'm glad that I can knock out a new state. I want to try to get a shipwreck in every state, and this one looks like it'd be kind of a hard one.
Yeah, no, this is a new state. We're going to Osage County, Kansas. And in case anyone's curious, the county does take its name from the same people who are the subject of Killers of the Flower Moon book and movie that just came out. But that Osage County was in Oklahoma. This Osage County is on the western side of Kansas. And here we find Lake Pomona. Lake Pomona is pretty small, and it's also not a natural lake. The Army Corps of Engineers built it. They created it in 1963 when they built the Pomona Dam. So it's basically a big reservoir. Instead of this one controlling electricity, this is a watershed runoff control dam. So when flooding happens, they're able to hold and then release in a controlled area water from Pomona Lake down to creeks, which then flow into the Missouri River and other rivers. Basically help keep the area dry in case of flash flooding.
Speaking of dams, just this morning I saw, since China is doing those military drills in like the Taiwan Strait, I've seen a lot of the Taiwan flag accounts. I've seen a lot of AI mock-ups of the Three Gorges Dam being destroyed by like a nuclear strike. I don't think that's going to happen, first of all. It's like, why would you want that to happen? That would kill like millions of people.
I saw several times some other flag accounts being like, if China and Russia teamed up and went through Alaska, they would conquer all of America.
Yes.
They just saw Fallout and thought, what if we just did the plot to that?
No one realizes how big Alaska is.
The Japanese tried this strategy already.
Yeah. Imagine if Operation Barbarossa, but the first major cities were 2,000 miles from the starting point. You know? You'd have to get all the way to Vancouver. Anywho, though, back to the lake. So geographically, and I sent a file of pictures to y'all's email. I don't know if y'all got that.
Tasteful nudes.
Yeah, I see it.
Boobs and bio. So from east to west, the lake measures just under 6 miles, and most of its north-south span is less than 1. It also has these 2 big branches on the northern side, which to me makes the whole thing look like a slug with 2 big fat antennae. It's kind of weird looking, but lakes are often weird looking, and it's hard to describe their shape. It's just north of the small community of Vassar, Kansas, from which the park took its name. After the reservoir was established, it became a state park. It was called Vassar State Park then. Now it's called Pomona State Park. It's situated pretty much 40 miles directly south of Topeka. And as such, the new lake and surrounding park became a popular getaway spot for people. The park boasted around 900 campsites, and it was also used for boating and fishing. On the south side of the lake was the lighthouse marina, where alongside the motorboats and sailboats used by lakegoers, we find the main character of this story. Sitting among all these regular boats was a pretty unusual sight for the 1970s, a paddle wheel steamboat. It was called the Whippoorwill. So you guys have talked a lot about paddle wheel steamboats.
Mm-hmm.
For one, when we usually picture them, we picture like those late 1800s big grand steamers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That are hundreds of feet long and hold hundreds of people. Well, this one is not that. The Whippoorwill had a length of 65 feet and a beam of 16 feet. And she was basically just straight made out of wood. She was built in Leavenworth, Kansas, and she could carry up to 60 people on 2 decks. While the upper deck was roofed, neither was enclosed by walls. Basically, except for the wheelhouse, engine room, and galley, there was no inside, quote unquote, of the boat. The reason for this is because the purpose of the boat was to take passengers out to enjoy a nice evening on the placid lake. So it's just to get out and have a nice, chill evening with the family kind of deal.
It's interesting seeing how different it looks than like the bigger paddle boats that you see that were built with like commerce in mind versus like this is supposed to be like, oh, we had a fun hour and a half out on the lake and we came back home.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it was built in someone's backyard a little bit.
Yeah, it looks like something that you would see like at Disney that like runs in with like the little water tracks basically that doesn't really go anywhere. The Rock in Jungle Cruise.
Yeah. As far as I could tell, it really was powered by steam, presumably with a little oil boiler. And as you see from the pictures, it has its wheel mounted on the back. So the Whippoorwill was owned by married couple Bruce and Vita Rogers, who also owned the Vassar Playhouse. Located near the marina, the Vassar Playhouse offered dinner theaters with a twist. Instead of sitting in the restaurant dining room, customers would get their dinner and show out on the lake aboard the Whippoorwill. Exactly how this looked in reality, what with the little amount of space available and the fact that the diners would be on 2 decks, is still kind of mysterious to me. But it was popular at the time, though, because the Whippoorwill regularly departed the marina at 7 p.m., full of people, ready to have a nice night on the lake.
That's a tight squeeze to have a dinner theater on.
Yeah.
60 by 16, something like that. It's just, have you been to a dinner theater? I have not.
I have once or twice, I think. Not like this, though. It was like just like at a venue.
I would imagine most dinner theaters are just at a venue.
Like it was fine.
Rather than on a lake.
They just tore it down. But there was a mall that was dying. It was basically dead here. And I went there with an old girlfriend. We were just walking around and there was like 6 posters for different murder themed dinner theater plays, all written by the same person. It was very odd.
Somebody's trying to start that side hustle.
So before we get into our incident, it's time to kind of go ahead and spoil what might happen, because we got to talk about tornadoes.
We almost had a tornado here a couple nights ago. We had those storms rolling in
Yeah, you guys
that came
did.
through Iowa. The whole state was covered in a big storm. We had the tornado warning across the TV, but we got some wind and some rain, but I don't think it was ever really close to tornado here. Wisconsin doesn't get a ton of tornadoes, but we did have one a couple years ago that went through Appleton that knocked out power for like 3 days. Oh, I see that you have that question.
I got a prompt later.
I'll cut that and drop it in after the question.
That's okay. No, there's supposed to be today is a dangerous day in Oklahoma. Pretty much every chaser in the country is in the OKC area right now today. So
A dangerous day for chasers.
could be a bad one. So most people listening are probably familiar with what a tornado is. And if you're an American, there's a decent chance you've had an encounter with a tornadic situation, even if you've never personally witnessed one.
If someone's not familiar with the tornado, my question is, how old are you?
I feel like where we've lived in Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, Tennessee,
Pittsburgh is the only place we've lived that is not going to get a tornado.
but they just had one. They just had a big one the other day.
Like in Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
How?
Oak Hill. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
climate change.
Oh, we can't release this episode in Florida anymore.
Oh well, I'm banned from Florida anyway. Apparently, Goblin Rick Scott says like he doesn't want me there. Dude looks like Lex Luthor. He says I can't go. Yeah, if you're an American, you've probably been close to a turtleneck situation before, because the United States has the most out of any country on Earth. We average about 1,200 per year, which is maybe, if we have some people listening from not from the U.S. or from places that don't get them as much, maybe we take them kind of for granted because they just happen thousands of times a year here.
I definitely think, like, growing up in the Midwest for most of my life, I've got to see it to really be concerned about it. Like,
Right.
Even hearing the sirens and stuff at this point, it's like, all right, well, I'll be ready if it happens.
Yeah, like even a lot of Americans, I think, don't appreciate what a tornado truly is and like how big and destructive they can be, because they so often do happen in wide open areas where there's not a huge amount of population. So it's like when one of them does hit, a built up area, it is truly devastating. I mean, like obviously
like the Dayton tornadoes from 4 or 5 years ago, like people still talk about them like they happened last year. Like it's like before the tornadoes and after, just because it hit really populated areas.
Yeah.
And like you can still see where it went through in certain places, so it'll just be a random line of no trees and then everything else is fine. Like it is like a big deal in the community.
There's a bunch of like YouTube videos you can find of people doing like before, after Google satellite.
Yeah, those are cool.
Tornadoes pass. And those can be pretty wild. So yeah, we average about 1,200 per year. We're having a particularly active year this year. And Canada comes in second place with about 100 per year.
Suck it.
And then coming third is Bangladesh, and I think they average around a dozen.
It's a big drop off,
something like that. But also, the tornadoes they do get tend to be tend to be pretty bad because of infrastructure issues and stuff like that.
I know in Bangladesh, like I'm sure with any kind of storm, probably comes with a lot of flooding issues. I know that's a major issue in Bangladesh.
I think they're like a part of the monsoon season over there too, and the way they form there.
Just getting hit with a monsoon and then that just spins off into like dozens of little tornadoes.
So Tanner, you said, you just had a thing go through. I mean, have any of you actually been closer to or seen a tornado? Or,
I mean, the closest one that I've been to, I think when I was a baby, there was one in
Cincinnati. I know we had one.
But I mean, the one a couple of years ago in Appleton's the closest I've really been to one, in that like we had to be in the basement and like it went through like parts of like downtown Appleton. So like there was trees down and there was power lines down and stuff. So like, yeah, like our apartment, we didn't have power for several days. We had to go to my work and like charge up our phones and come back. Yeah. I mean, that's the closest I've been. I've never been like in a building that was, hit by a tornado
in a Twister type situation.
No.
I've never been picked up and deposited in the magical land of Oz in an extended metaphor for the gold standard. That's my experience.
Me either. I've never laid my eyes on one, so I've never been close enough to see one. One went through the neighboring town when I was in high school, called Allendale, where my dad ran a factory. And I remember seeing just some of the, I think that one was rated at EF2 eventually. And the first thing I remember seeing was like a cell phone tower, and it was just crushed like a piece of paper and the factory had a brick facade, and there was a cinder block wall underneath the facade, and like all the bricks were just ripped down and just revealed the cinder blocks.
That's crazy.
And it was wild to see. And then my other little funny story was, do you guys remember the super outbreak of the 2011?
Mm-hmm. Actually, it comes up in a unit in the textbook that my students use. So I talk about it like every few months.
Oh, wow. I was a senior in high school when that happened. And so let me skip ahead to this. So full disclosure, I'm not a trained meteorologist. I'm just an enthusiast. So when I talk about things later, I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple so the experts don't find me and put me down.
We have at least one weather expert that listens, right?
People are going to leave a review like, great with shipwrecks, hate the weather episode.
I turned it off when they talked about weather.
I'll never be back on. Anyway, during the that outbreak, we had no idea where he was. My grandfather, who lived in Atlanta, my dad, I think, and he was like, Toby, guess where I'm in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I'm looking down a tornado. They were on the way to Biloxi, Mississippi to go gamble. They were in Tuscaloosa when the outbreak started happening and called us, and then we were all scared for him the rest of the day.
Yeah, I guess that close to a tornado, yeah, you are gambling in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, as I said, I'm just an enthusiast, so I'm going to keep things pretty simple. Basically, a tornado so this is the part where I because of my enthusiasm, I'm just going to go into like tornado shit for a little bit. Because I think it's cool, and I hope other people will think it's cool.
We just spent like 4 hours talking about the Battle of Lepanto, so I'm sure people will find this a lot more relevant to the actual shipwreck.
And because I'm so passionate about it, I want people to like, take them seriously and shit, So we're going to go through some stuff about tornadoes. Basically, at its heart, a tornado is a type of whirlwind, a spinning updraft, an updraft being exactly what it sounds like. Wind moving from low to high. Now, what goes into the formation of a tornado is extremely complicated, and only really recently have people begun to kind of understand the actual mechanics of it. Very simply put, they form from rotating thunderstorms or rotating areas within thunderstorms. Sometimes these storms form independently or discretely, as meteorologists put it, which are called supercells. And those are usually the big bad ones that make the big scary ones that you hear about. Tornadoes could also be in rotating thunderstorms within squall lines or big lines of storms, or even within hurricanes. Anywhere that you have a wind shear, you might end up with a tornado situation. In all those scenarios, a tornado has to have a balance of factors, the wind shear, like I mentioned, but also dew point, instability, and energy in the atmosphere. The balance of these ingredients are what allow a tornado to form, and because the balance has to be just right, this is why almost all thunderstorms don't generate tornadoes. I listened to a talk by James Spann once, and he emphasized that for people who are kind of scared of them, just to kind of remember, they're very rare. We might still have a lot, but on the whole, consider how many thunderstorms we all get in a year, most of them aren't dangerous.
Studying tornadoes is so interesting because it seems like it would be extremely difficult to do your data collection from an actual tornado because they don't last that long. Mm-hmm. Whereas a hurricane, if you can fly in and out of those, you can take your measurements, but tornadoes spin up and break apart in minutes. A few miles on the ground maybe. So it's really interesting that how do you go about doing those?
Different types of radar have been extremely useful. Doppler radar especially was a big deal. So now we could measure wind velocity and which way it's going a lot easier and better now. But because of our greater understanding, the average warning time in the last 30 years has went from minus 10 minutes to plus 10 minutes.
Right.
So 30 years ago, a tornado might have been on the ground already for 30 minutes before you heard about it. Now, a lot of the time, you'll hear 5 days ahead of time. A lot of times, meteorologists start pulling out hey, you need to watch this day.
That's basically what our local news had was, they had the all night, this is Christmas for the meteorologist guys on the local.
Yeah.
They had the maps pulled up and we're kind of highlighting areas that of particular risk, saying, we can't predict these exactly, but hey, if you're around Fond du Lac here, you could be in a hot spot here for tornadic activity.
The people who do that are so cool, do such an important job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think get thought about a lot. So listeners have probably also heard of the Fujita scale, aka the F scale, or now the enhanced Fujita scale, which is the one that's been used by the National Weather Service since 2007.
Named for New Orleans linebacker Scott Fujita.
I'll get to Fujita soon. He's a cool dude. The EF scale is how we rate the severity of tornadoes in the US and Canada. Other parts of the world use their own scale. There's one I think called the Toro scale that Europe uses, and it's a 1 to 10 scale, and I don't understand it, but
I'm going to go with us on the tornado scale. I feel like
no European is going to tell me how to measure a tornado.
Yeah.
At least 2 F5s have happened in Britain, 1 in the Soviet Union, and 2 in France.
Good.
Instead of Britain,
all places that deserve.
Instead of Britain, I meant Germany. I think Britain might have also had one.
My good was mostly aimed at the UK and France.
And yeah. And Interestingly, the one that hit the Soviet Union carved a big area out the forest, and they decided to just put a city in there.
Comrade Tornado.
Sometimes nature does the work.
It's like, might as well take advantage of it.
Tornadogorsk? How is this city name?
They called it Red Clearing or something like that.
Very cool.
So unlike a hurricane, which is categorized while it's ongoing based on sustained winds, a tornado is actually rated after it's occurred. After a tornado, engineers and meteorologists come in and they evaluate the damage along the path and figure out the winds that would be required to do whatever damage that is. And the tornado is always rated based on the area of most damage. The pros look for what they call damage indicators, and there is a big, huge, thorough guide on how to assess these for rating a storm. Building construction, geography, like was the building anchored down? Just huge list for them to rate the storm. And then the storm is always rated like if only one house out of 100, if only one of those is rated EF4, then the whole tornado is rated that, even if it wasn't at that peak intensity its whole time. Which is why sometimes ratings change or come out late, especially with those really big ones. You know, there's also a lot of cleanup and stuff going on, and this just takes time.
Now, in the old F scale, because I seem to remember this from like learning about tornadoes in school, like elementary school, which would have been like the F scale, I assume.
Yep.
Was that one purely based on damage? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yep.
Because like, yeah, I seem to remember like that being a difference in like you could have a very strong tornado, but it would have a low rating if it didn't damage stuff. If it happened to not damage, any sort of,
So basically the way it did, so the difference between the EF scale, basically people realized, so the F scale would have higher wind speeds associated with each rating. And people realized, we don't need 300 mile an hour winds to do F5 damage.
Okay.
Winds way
like a
lower
better
than
understanding of what this entails.
That was why, and now there's talk of trying to tweak it even more, twerk it even more, taking like Doppler readings into account, because there have been some tornadoes which, if they had hit anything of a proper structure, they definitely would have been an EF5. Everyone talks about the El Reno tornado from 2013 that was 2.5 miles wide, killed a couple storm chasers. If that one had hit like a town, it surely would have been an EF5, but it's rated an EF3. And, some weather people get annoyed by that. And so they want to take like wind speed measurements into account. But right now it's just damage. And the reason we have all this, the guy who formed the scale is named is Tetsuya Ted Fujita, and he was awesome. During his life, he observed the damage of thousands of tornadoes, and while he was alive, he was the world's #1 expert on them. And it's actually quite lucky we have him. He was born and grew up in Japan, and when he was 24, in August of 1945,
No.
he was living in Kokura, which was the primary target of the Fat Man atomic bomb. However, luckily for him and Kokura and for science, the city was obscured by clouds and smoke, so the plane was sent to Nagasaki instead. In fact, Fujita got some of his early experience in damage evaluation by observing the destruction done to Nagasaki and Hiroshima, particularly noting the effects of blast wind generated by the bombs, which informed his major breakthroughs in understanding downbursts and microbursts in particular. Which is where he kind of got his start in the weather field, by studying those phenomena. Now, real quick, I want to know, I said it was lucky that Kokura, was spared, but, I don't ever want to talk about that without forgetting that we'll never know how many other Ted Fujitas were in the nuked cities. Or also, now that smart people are more important than others, every life erased in those blasts is a tragedy. And I feel like it's always important to acknowledge that, regardless on whether we think the bomb should have been used or not. Shortly after that, I think in the 50s, Ted got sponsored by a guy from, I think, University of Chicago. I'm going to write this part down. And that's how he got brought to the U.S. and started watching weather in the U.S. But we were lucky to have him. And so let's go through the scale real quick. So there are 6 ratings on the scale. Technically 7, but one of them is EFU, with the U being unknown. And that just means we know a tornado happened. And though our story takes place in 1978 when the original F scale was used, I'm just going to go through the EF scale here in terms of the wind speeds, which is pretty similar anyway. Starting out, you got your EF zeros, and these are 65 to 85 mile an hour winds. These are by far the most common type of tornado. They usually last only seconds or minutes.
There's probably one in the room with you right now.
Yeah, there might indeed be something like 76% of all tornadoes are EF zeros, and then like 20% are EF ones or something like that. Most tornadoes are little weak ones, but the zeros, you could do some shingles. You might have some broken branches, yard furniture blown around, some glass maybe blowing out the windows of your house or your car. EF1 is 86 to 110 mile an hour. So say goodbye to your garage door and possibly your roof. Vehicles can be pushed or rolled over, and mobile homes can be flipped over. Tractor trailers can be pushed off the side of the road. Decent-sized trees will lose limbs or be blown over. Power lines and telephone poles will be snapped, and the little work shed you got in the back is going to be gone.
That's the scary thing with tornadoes, is that like you're going through the scale from bottom to top, and like even this pretty weak tornado could potentially, tear the roof off your house, which is like a major fix you've got to deal with. Well, and that's just the baby one.
Yeah, now we're at EF2, so 111 to 135 miles an hour. At this point, we're looking at pretty severe damage. Despite the low sounding category of 2, these tornadoes are up in Cat 3 hurricane territory in terms of wind speeds. With these, all but the strongest of the trees are blown over or snapped. Both roofs and the interior of walls of homes will be damaged or destroyed, with the possibility of outside walls being torn away. Small, weak buildings will be completely destroyed, especially mobile homes. And moving on up to F3 is 136 to 165 miles an hour winds. If your home is impacted by an EF3, you're going to need a new house. Single-story homes are often demolished. Two-story homes are likely to have their entire top floor torn away. Many trees will be broken and or lofted. Buildings with large open interiors, such as warehouses, will be severely damaged and possibly destroyed. Cars are lofted yards through the air, and train wagons can be derailed. Large machinery, such as tractors, can be tossed or rolled. And the last two we'll go through quick, because at this point, with the EF4, we're looking at 166 to 200 miles an hour. It's kind of a moot point for those directly affected, because it's just destruction either way.
It's kind of overkill at this point. It's like it doesn't need to be doing all this, but it can.
It really doesn't. So for those affected, it doesn't really matter. But we have there is worse than worse, apparently. Because even the lowest end F4s have stronger winds than any Category 5 hurricane. Well-built homes will be completely destroyed, sometimes swept. Trees are debarked, and damage can be done to the frames of high-rise buildings. Cars are thrown dozens or even hundreds of yards. Moving trains can be derailed or blown over. And then with F5s, 201 plus miles an hour. Now, the reason the scale only goes up to 5 is because you can't get more destroyed than completely destroyed.
The famous Andre 3000 line, what's more destroyed than totally destroyed?
Was pretty much what Fujita considered an F6 rating after the 74 super outbreak in Virginia, Ohio.
It's just down the road from me.
Oh, yeah. They got one of the most powerful tornadoes of all time went through there in 74.
I think I remember hearing about that story.
Yeah, that one is a pretty big one, like locally, that there's still like every anniversary it's in the news and everything. It is like, that's like you see pictures and it's a truly scary one.
Yeah. And it was part of, I think there were 7 F5s that day, because that was the other super outbreak. Fujita considered giving that one an F6 before deciding that an F6 was literally inconceivable to him. And he's a guy who saw nuke damage, so...
Is one of those the basis for the book/movie Night of the Twisters?
Yes, I think... Oh, no, actually...
Because I remember watching that in elementary, in like
one of
grade.
those... I can't remember which outbreak it is. I don't think it's the 74 outbreak. I think it's
Oh, it's based on... an outbreak of 7 tornadoes that struck Grand Island, Nebraska on June 3rd, 1980.
I was literally just watching a video about that one, and I can't. The one thing about that event, there's like one of the tornadoes all of them had really weird paths. They went from they did loop-de-loops and zigzags, and they went from northeast to southwest. It was just very weird.
The Tuscaloosa tornado, wasn't that one unique for how long it was on the ground?
That one, well, for that day, not really.
Okay.
So a lot of these super strong EF4s, EF5s will track for dozens of miles a lot of the time.
I think that is one of the scariest things with tornadoes, though, is how arbitrary they tend to be. Whereas with a tornado or with a hurricane, you can prepare, you can fight it, you can, it's coming. But with a tornado, you could just quite literally be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's more like the artillery effect of World War I, that the thought of it is truly more scary than the likelihood of you actually getting impacted by it. But
I've seen satellite images of a tornado going through a rural kind of area, and you could see the swirls and the crops because it was a fall tornado. It was weird, but it was weird because the houses are all spread out, right? But every once in a while, it would just hit one dead on, and then there'd be another one 100 yards away, totally fine. And then every once in a while, it would just hit one. It's just a matter of luck,
Yeah.
But yeah, so with the F5s, basically the damage beggars belief. Well-built, properly anchored homes are slabbed, sometimes with the foundations being shifted. The debris may be strewn for more than a mile if it isn't granulated by the wind. Trees are completely uprooted and debarked, and the topsoil of the ground may be pulled up. Livestock caught in the storm may be flayed by the debris as they are lofted. That's happened on record at least once.
Why do we have so many people getting flayed on this show recently? We had one in Lepanto. We have these animals here.
These poor cows. Yeah. Another tornado in particular dug trenches 2 feet deep, and sometimes they could also rip asphalt up off the ground, off of highways, which it sounds completely nuts to me.
I still think ripping the bark off of a tree sounds like one of the craziest effects of these. And not ripping the tree out of the ground, that sounds pretty normal. But being able to tear the tree into small pieces is insane.
Yeah. And there's left as toothpicks sticking about the ground. This one that just happened in Iowa, there's a picture of a Ford Ranger, I think, but a small pickup truck. And the tree, it looks like the tree grew up through the bed. Is how it landed. It somehow came down on top of the tree, and the tree pierced the bed. And so now it's impaled by this debarked tree.
I bet that guy wishes he had one of those monster child murdering trucks that wouldn't get tossed around by a storm now.
Those would too, though, which gives me some satisfaction at least.
Driving my Tesla Cybertruck through a tornado.
Did you see the video of the Cybertruck with 3 little bags of mulch in the back?
Yeah, I saw it this morning.
I literally was my Honda Civic can do this.
Yeah.
I think my Toyota Corolla.
And it would get me the whole way to my destination without killing me.
And finally, before we get to our incident, just a public service announcement to anybody who may not be in a tornado, might not been in a tornado situation, but if you are in your house in the tornado warning, get into the middle of your house if you can, lowest floor. People don't think about this, but especially if you're under an extreme tornado warning or a tornado emergency, put on your shoes. And if you have a helmet, bring a helmet, because if you might be dealing with broken glass, the majority of tornado fatalities are actually head injuries from buildings falling on top of people. And if you can't do that, grab something, cover your head. If you're in a car, get out of the car and get in a ditch or a nearby building that's safe. Do not ever go under an underpass. No. And meteorologists thought that was good advice for a while, because the one piece of evidence that they had where people lived, it was a uniquely built overpass with a little nook where they could shade. It wasn't until a few years later when another tornado went through and went over 3 overpasses and killed someone at each one that they realized, oh, this might not be good.
This is like a snack for the tornado.
It basically puts you into a wind tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And, the wind's not what's so dangerous. It's the stuff that's flying around in the wind. So if you imagine like what a stop sign flying through the air at 200 miles an hour might do to you.
Mm-hmm.
So with that public service announcement out of the way and all this shit about tornadoes out of the way, let's finally get to boats. The incident. The early evening of June 17th, 1978, at Vassar State Park was not unlike many other Kansas afternoons. Temperatures that June were fairly mild, in the low 70s to high 60s. On the 17th, thunderstorms had begun developing west of Osage County, while to the east, Franklin County had been issued a tornado warning for storms developing there. At 6:15 p.m., the National Weather Service office in Topeka issued a severe weather statement warning of thunderstorms forming to the east of Osage County. People around the lake at the time thought the weather was pleasant. Bill Hodgson was at the Lighthouse Bay Marina with his son-in-law, Lawrence Stadel, who owned the marina, and recalled that the weather was, quote, quite nice. At a campsite on the southern shore, Herb Johnson and his family were also observing the weather, noting around 6:30 that,
To the north, the sky was very dark, and lightning was visible. It really looked like the bad weather had passed by.
the Rogers, owners of the Vassar Playhouse, evidently also judged that the weather was safe enough to proceed with their scheduled cruise and performance, and at 6:30, the passengers and crew were boarding the Whippoorwill for that evening's cruise. At 6:47, the NWS issued a severe thunderstorm watch, though the emphasis was on thunderstorms themselves and not potential tornadoes. I don't know if this statement made it to those aboard the Whippoorwill, but if it did not change plans. By 7 o'clock, all were aboard, and the boat began its departure from Lighthouse Bay Marina, as usual, carrying 58 passengers and crew. Among those aboard were Bruce Rogers, the owner, and his children. Bruce's wife, Veda, remained at the Vassar Playhouse.
I think it's interesting, like, you talk about, do they know that there's a watch? But I think we all know, being from like the Midwest or the South, that it probably wouldn't have changed anyone's mind.
Yeah,
like,
probably not.
How often are you under a tornado or a thunderstorm watch and like you don't even really think about it?
Yeah, even around here, it's like, unless there's lightning, it's on,
Yeah, right.
The show that night was to be Dames at Sea.
Hoo-hoo!
Are you aware of that one? I don't know.
No, but I'm interested in some dames at sea.
Aren't we all?
It's actually a fiction that I'm working on currently.
Patreon only. And the dinner, for anyone curious, was going to be pork chops, cider, fresh broccoli with lemon butter, baked potatoes, French bread, capped off with chocolate cake for dessert.
Did they at least get to eat dinner first?
I don't know. Actually, I do know, actually. A fair number of the crew were young people, including teenagers, working a fun summer job serving food and performing plays out on the lake. So I assume they served the food first.
I would think, yeah, that would make sense.
So this is all the same. The same crew is
it's the same
the
crew.
Food service and the acting troupe.
Yeah.
That does sound like fun, kind of.
Yeah, most of the crew on the boat is, teenagers serving food. I guess probably just the captain, and whose name I could not find. And I guess him and probably the engineer, whoever ran the engine, were probably like the only, I don't even want to say sea people because we're on a tiny lake, but
We can call them operations staff.
The only mariners.
The only mariners, as far as I could tell, were the engineer and the skipper. Oh, as I wrote, in other words, this boat did not require a crew of salted mariners to operate normally. As the Whippoorwill powdered her way out of the marina, everyone was set to enjoy a nice. At approximately 7:15, a small, wispy-looking funnel cloud began to descend towards the ground a few yards west of the lake. Within a minute, the tornado began to slowly move in a southeasterly direction and cross onto the Pomona Lake itself. With the lake and its surroundings being so popular, the tornado's formation did not go unnoticed. And here's where I need to take 1 second to differentiate between tornadoes and waterspouts. A waterspout technically is a whirlwind or tornado over water, but those ones that we usually picture like off the coast of, if you picture like a classic waterspout, you may be thinking of something like off the coast of Florida somewhere, moving slow. They look like these big smooth tubes,
Mm-hmm.
They are dangerous and they are technically whirlwinds, but they're not tornadic in the same way that a land tornado is. And land tornadoes, quote unquote, can cross rivers, lakes, anything. It's a kind of a myth that water is some kind of barrier for them. Just ask the Canadian River in Oklahoma. It's been crossed by thousands of tornadoes. And I say that too because some of the witnesses used the term water spout, I think, when they talked about this. But this is the more dangerous situation. Back at his campsite, Herb Johnson observed the Whippoorwill moving past his location. The boat was around 30 yards from shore at the time. It quickly passed the campsite and disappeared around a bend in the shoreline. Almost immediately after, Johnson noticed a tornado to the west in the direction the Whippoorwill was headed. At this time, the twister could be seen mostly through the spray of water it kicked up.
West of us, I could see a swirling water spray, much like you see on a playground, blowing leaves and dust, but much larger.
Remembering he'd just seen the showboat pass towards the direction of the twister, Johnson ran down to the shore to get a better look. He recalled,
"It was then that I could very clearly see that the whirlwind had developed into a smoke-colored finger spout. It wasn't very big, probably not over 100 feet high, and maybe 25 or 30 feet wide at the most."
So now is a good time to point out that the size and shape and direction of travel of tornadoes, even well-lit and visible ones, can be very hard to judge. They're constantly moving and changing shape, which can make their speed and direction difficult to judge by eye. For example, Herb Johnson's report of the tornado being 25 feet is probably not accurate. Every other official source that I could find puts this tornado at a width of 150 yards at the widest. So why the discrepancy, though? For one, tornadoes can be mostly invisible, and the field of tornadic winds can extend far beyond the visible funnel. Another clue could be found in the account of Bill Fisher, who watched the storm from his home on the southern shore. Fisher noticed that the tornado consisted of several vortices swirling around a common center. This is called a multi-vortex tornado, and while they are often associated with more violent tornadoes, they can occur in weaker ones as well. With most of the condensation funnel invisible and kicking up spray, I think that the 25-foot estimate Johnson gives really comes from him looking at one of these smaller sub-vortices orbiting the main circulation.
I would hate to have to estimate like size or distance of something in any official capacity because I'd be so bad at it.
There's a good rule of thumb, though. If you're looking at a tornado and it looks like it's standing still, it's coming at you.
You
should move. Of course, it did not go unnoticed amongst those on the Whippoorwill. What began initially as awe and fascination soon turned to alarm as the tornado continued to strengthen and it became clear that it was tracking directly towards the boat, picking up speed as it approached. Tom Mitchell, a 21-year-old crew member on the upper deck, I think he was a deckhand, so here we have another mariner, was on the upper deck when he saw the funnel.
We'd been out about 15 minutes. That's all. About a minute before, we saw a water spout. Other than that, I have no idea. It just turned into a funnel.
As the danger became increasingly obvious, Bruce Rogers ordered his skipper to turn away. But the slow paddle boat was no match for the twister, which was approaching at close to highway speeds by this point. Suddenly, almost before they knew it, the boat was overcome. The tornado seems to have sideswept the vessel, but that was enough. The 80-plus mile-an-hour winds kicked up large waves and began to rip at the superstructure. But the main blow came as the circulation overtook the vessel and all hell broke loose. Mitchell, along with everyone else, found themselves in the lake in an instant as the paddle boat capsized. Those on open decks were thrown straight into the water, while those inside the galley found themselves trapped beneath the surface. In the galley, 20-year-old crew member Larry Presgrove, who had no idea about the tornado, suddenly found himself in chaos as the boat rolled. He recalled,
"I was in the galley, and all I knew was that the boat was tipping over. 1 minute, we were serving salads, and the next, we were in the water."
Presgrove was knocked around as the capsizing happened, and once he was underwater, he kicked up, instinct driving him to try to surface. His head emerged into a small air pocket where he tried to remain calm and assess the situation. He knew his best chance was for someone to come rescue him rather than try to escape the vessel, and soon he began pounding on the wall, hoping someone would hear. Shortly, After that, another banging sound began in the next room, the boiler room. It was 17-year-old James Olson, another crew member caught by surprise when the Whippoorwill rolled over, and who also was trapped in an air pocket. When he heard Presgrove making noise, he began to do the same. Smart kids.
So
Yeah.
I guess silver lining here of it capsizing so rapidly, I assume it's more likely to have those air pockets if that's happening so fast.
Probably.
I would assume because it's not going to settle in the
Yeah.
water. It's just getting It's like when you take a cup and just slam it down into water.
And it's also mostly wooden, so it's pretty buoyant already, too, as well. But yeah, smart kids, instead of trying to get out,
Mm-hmm.
I would be peeing my pants. It's a good thing I was in the lake, so no one would know. Those outside in the water were fighting for their lives as well. A lot of the reason these quotes are so short is because they're like from news, directly from news things. An unidentified male survivor talking to local WIBW News described his experience after being thrown into the water.
I managed to grab a breath of air, and I came back up again. And I was drug under that time.
Some struggled to swim, weighed down by their clothes. Many made for the upturned flat keel and began to scramble on top. Several witnesses watched the vessel be stricken from a distance. One witness, also talking to WIBW News, put it simply, "The wind just hit it and it fell right over." Herb Johnson had more to say.
It, the tornado, appeared to suddenly change direction 90 degrees and go straight for the Whippoorwill. It came from the rear on the right side, struck the boat, and turned it over. It didn't lift the boat out of the water. It seemingly just turned it over, as if it had pushed it over. We stood in utter disbelief as the boat was turned over, and we could hear people screaming for help. They were splashing around in the water and drowning right before our eyes. We had no way to help them. They were too far away to reach.
He added,
We were the closest people to the capsizing, and saw it even better than those on the Whippoorwill itself. It's a terrible thing to see families laughing and having a good time, and then moments later see them in panic, agony, despair, or even death.
Imagine also just seeing this happen in front of you, too.
I'm looking at the map, the path of the tornado, in your
Oh, yeah.
your image email here, and it is crazy how when it gets to the end of the lake here, it just kind of like takes like an almost 90-degree left turn and just goes a total different direction.
Yeah.
It looks so intentional.
It really does look like it just came straight for it. Like it just wasn't their day. After overturning the Whippoorwill, the Twister continued on its southeast track, heading more or less straight towards the Pomona Dam, which it probably would not have done any significant damage to, certainly not enough to compromise it, until it turned left and tracked northeast, finally leaving the lake and traveling a couple miles before dissipating in an area called Michigan Valley, doing some F0 to F1 damage to trees and camping equipment, but harming no one else. The time from when the tornado touched down to when it impacted the Whippoorwill was very brief, perhaps less than 2 minutes. Bill Streeter, who was the region supervisor and Vassar State Park manager at the time, saw the tornado shortly after it formed and immediately radioed both the ranger on duty and the local sheriff.
I told them we had an active tornado coming down the lake. Within a minute and a half, my ranger radioed back that the Whippoorwill had been hit.
Streeter rushed to the scene. He described,
It happened very quickly. The boat was upside down in the lake. People were trying to clamber up and get up on it that could swim or weren't trapped. As soon as word spread through the camp, a lot of those people came asking, how can we help? What can we do?
Thus began rescue efforts. Fortunately for the people on the Whippoorwill, a lot of people on shore either saw the disaster directly or learned of it very quickly, and nearly all in the area rushed to the scene to see what they could do to help. This is the part of the stories that I like. We'll get to a little bit more of that in a minute. Meanwhile, Vita Rogers, wife of Bruce and co-owner of the boat, was alerted when a man came literally screeching into the parking lot of the Vassar Playhouse to give her the news. At nearly the same time, Lawrence Stadel, owner of the Lighthouse Marina, had nearly identical experience as a boat, instead of a car, sped into the marina to alert him of the disaster. Stadel was scuba trained, and he grabbed his gear and hopped into a boat to speed towards the Whippoorwill. Stadel arrived to find the upside-down boat surrounded by other boaters from the area, frantically fishing people out of the water and retrieving others from the upturned keel. Most of the rescued were in shock and shivering. Luckily, this is a lake in Kansas in the summertime and not the Great Lakes, so no one was in danger of hypothermia. Stadel knew that if there were any survivors within the submerged portion of the boat, that they'd likely be in air pockets. He donned his diving gear and entered the dark water. By now, the sun was beginning to set rapidly, and Stadel could see basically nothing in the already dark waters of the lake. He said afterwards,
"There's no visibility down there at all. It's a matter of feeling." And then I heard, at first, one person tapping on the hull.
It was Pressgrove and Olson in their separate air pockets banging on the bulkheads. Stadel navigated by feel and sound until he found someone's leg. He rose up and his head emerged next to Olson. There was just enough space for them to talk to one another as to prepare for the escape. As such, James Olson was able to be extracted relatively easily. Hearing more banging, Stadel went back down and felt around until he found Pressgrove. However, Pressgrove had barely enough room in his air pocket for his own head, and Stadel was unable to communicate verbally with him. So he had to take a chance. He squeezed Pressgrove's leg to let him know help had arrived, waited a moment to give the young man a chance to take a hopefully deep enough breath, and then yanked him down and hauled him to the surface. Thankfully, Pressgrove had taken a deep enough breath, and he praised Stadel as a total hero, which I agree with.
That's
that
crazy,
is some
yeah.
that is badassery.
It's always so fun hearing these stories of just like a guy who's just a dude who happens to have the right skills, like go into rescue hero mode.
It just rises to the occasion.
Having to do it that way of like squeezing a leg, what is the timing going to be like here? When is he probably going to inhale after I do this? And then
Yeah, like are you like squeezing him 3 times to give him like a 1, 2, 3? Like here we go.
That's probably scarier than the boat flipping over. Probably
situations where someone has to like hold their breath and go under and navigate through something. I mean, I guess fortunately here it's not a huge boat with lots of like winding corridors that you'd have to navigate through. But still, it's like that scene in the Poseidon Adventure where they have to like go through that tunnel that's like submerged and to hold their breath. That's my least favorite part of that movie.
Yeah, that part is actually like anxiety inducing.
45 minutes had passed since the tornado struck, but now professional emergency responders were arriving in droves. Streeter, the park manager, who had first radioed in the tornado, was now at the marina, directing people as it became a makeshift aid station. Streeter, who is also an EMT, was there as the first survivors were brought ashore. EMTs see a lot of shit, but this experience had haunted him. He told WIBW 20 years later,
"Trying to do my job as an EMT in dealing with people and feeling and hearing their grief will be with me forever."
As word spread, it wasn't long before local media learned of the tragedy. At WIBW offices in Topeka, 24-year-old Kent Cornish was told that something had happened at Pomona Lake and that he needed to get his ass over there right away. He jumped in his car and he rushed the 40 miles south to the lake. Here's how Cornish described what he saw after arriving on the scene.
I still didn't know when I got down there what had happened. Everybody's kind of running around, and I mean, there's just chaos because the Whippoorwill was only about 100 yards offshore. So you could see it, and you could see people standing on top of the hull. There was a guy in his boat starting to back up, and I ran down with my equipment and said, "Can I get in? I'm from WIBW television." He goes, "Yeah, jump in." Turned out, I was the only news person who got out on the water while the boat was still capsized. The guy driving the boat pulls up pretty close, and there's scuba divers in the water. There are just people that have jumped in to try and help. There's people standing up on the hull who crawled out from under it.
Cornish took pictures of everything. And just about all the pictures you see of the immediate aftermath of the sinking come from him, and the footage he took made national news. By 9 p.m., the area was swarming with rescuers. This included police and sheriff's departments, medical responders, the Salvation Army, and 35 divers. Herb Johnson's campsite became a base of operations. That's the closest spot to the actual boat. Cables from tow trucks ashore were attached to the capsized Whippoorwill, and it was slowly turned back over onto its proper side. This is when the majority of the deceased were discovered. Recovery efforts went on until 2 a.m. and were resumed later that morning of the 18th. By the end of the 18th, only one person, 9-year-old Melissa Wright, was still missing. Her body would be found on the 20th. So now I have the aftermath section.
I think there it's interesting. Just even the first guy, Stadel, who goes into and rescues the people from the air pockets, happens to be, a guy in the area. He's scuba trained. He has his scuba gear like with him. And then talking about like multiple other people with scuba gear that are just on scene pretty quickly. And I think it's like a stark contrast here to our stories like a long time ago we did the Bukoba in Lake Victoria, where in, I guess it was Tanzania, them not even having divers available or not having enough diving gear available. This is talking about a whole country, having to get help from its neighbors just to put together enough of a dive team to recover bodies. So it's interesting, like the on-scene assets available immediately here.
When you put it that way, it's so much easier to get things in this country, in this part of the world.
Even in like a place where you wouldn't think of as being like a maritime area, you still got people who have the gear and, the training necessary to do this.
It's something we take for granted a lot of the time.
I was just slightly different thought, but looking through this and like seeing the names we're kind of getting to here, I don't think we have this info. We could probably find it if we really dug, but I would love to see a breakdown of survivors and victims based on age and gender, because I see a lot of feminine names being listed.
I do.
It's always very interesting to see those breakdowns. And then like we have the story of the two young guys surviving that are like 18 or 19. And it's like we talk about like that optimal survivor of a shipwreck is between the ages of like 16 and 35 and male. And it seems to hold true throughout so many examples.
I don't have a breakdown of the total complement, but I do have a list of all the victims and their names and ages. So I do have that.
Yeah, I briefly kind of skimmed that real quick, and it seemed like it definitely continued the trend.
But yeah, the other thing too, that part of the reason that I picked the story because of tornadoes, but reading this story and some others like it, and including a bunch of the shipwreck stories, reminds me of like how, despite what we see in movies and a lot of media, people usually have a tendency to help out in situations that are bigger than themselves. You always see like society and shit breaking down in movies in the face of disaster, but in real life, we tend to see people coming together more.
I feel like particularly in like the maritime world, where you just don't ask any questions, you save the person and figure it out later if there's anything to figure out. Like the first thing, no matter what, is to try to get the person safe. It is cool to see that, to see people respond that way in so many different examples and situations and everything.
I think even the most cynical of us would be surprised at the compulsion for empathy when faced with something extreme. And I find that encouraging.
Absolutely.
So, aftermath. In the end, 15 people were pulled dead from the lake. One of them was Judy Patterson, who was 8 months pregnant, which brought the official death toll to 16. The dead ranged in age from, aside from the unborn baby, from 9 to 79, and included 3 faculty members of Emporia State University. Killed along with young Melissa Wright were her mother Sandra and her grandmother Grace. Bruce Rogers and his kids were among the survivors. The Rogers were devastated by the event, both emotionally and financially. No one seemed to blame them. They had support from the community in the aftermath of this. They managed to repair the boat and keep the business going for another 2 years, but they never fully recovered, and the Vassar Playhouse was shut down.
I can imagine that that's a weird dynamic of like, well, we don't blame you for this, but also like it's weird to get on your boat where a bunch of people died. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, this boat has already been hit by a tornado one time, and like, what are the odds that it would happen twice?
I'm picturing him showing up after like closing this one down, but like they're called duck boats. We own 3 of them now.
Yeah.
The Marvel movie like teaser at the end of the where it's like, I got this idea. Duck boats.
Putting together a team. After incidents like this, people often look for especially maritime incidents, people often look for somewhere to put the blame. But in this case, people seem to view it as a purely natural disaster. I don't know what people said to each other privately, but I could find no one on the record placing direct blame on the Rogers for taking the boat out. And the Wichita Eagle, a well-known Reverend Richard Taylor Jr. wrote an emotional op-ed in which he pointed out the Rogers would not have taken his kids on the boat if he thought there was any danger. That reminds me of one of those Great Lakes stories.
We mentioned that, I know, on the True North too, that you did, Taylor. The one at
where he brought his dog with him.
Yeah, I guess it was a dog in that case.
Yeah.
But either way, like, you wouldn't, like, if you thought it was really dangerous, you wouldn't bring your dog.
Remember the one where the guy brought his family, but his dad, who was also an old mariner, was like, no, I'm not getting on the boat.
I vaguely remember that. No,
I don't remember which one it was, but I remember his dad being like, no, that boat sucks. I'm not going to get on it. And then the whole family died. The Reverend's eulogy, though, is pretty moving, and I just wanted to share a little bit.
Last Sunday, I sat in the yard and watched a glorious Kansas sunset. The top leaves of the cottonwoods were nearly motionless, and the air was cool. This is the kind of Kansas that gave such pleasure to the passengers on the Whippoorwill. What a contrast to the 24 hours earlier, when out of the same Kansas sky came death and destruction. As the sun disappeared in the west, a giant jet took off from Forbes Field, climbing and heading east. They crash at times, but flights continue. If there had been a question of safety, Mr. Rogers would not have been aboard with his children. I do not know why a tornado struck the happy passengers and crew of the Whippoorwill. I only know we must continue to give our best.
Some pretty nice sentiment there. Also a little bit of sentiment that Boeing probably shares. They crash at times, but flights continue. The storms that produced the Pomona Lake tornado spawned 7 other twisters that day, all of them weak, and none of which did significant harm to any people or structures. The tornado that hit the boat was described as a 1,000,001 shot. The 16 deaths caused by the tornado make it the deadliest F1/EF1 tornado to date. In fact, while Kansas had seen deadlier storms in the past, it would not see another tornado top 16 deaths until the 1991 Andover F5, which took 17 lives, but also injured many more people. Lawrence Stadel, scuba glass hero badass and owner of the marina, bought the Whippoorwill after Proctor's business shut down. The boat would sink sometime later after a fire, but once again it was rescued and he converted it into a houseboat. And it sat in some disrepair until it was bought by 2 brothers in their 20s in 2018.
That has to be an incredibly haunted houseboat.
Yeah.
Like, no restful night's sleep in there.
So now I'm going to get to... This bit's more funny. So yeah, the last little bit here is actually kind of more funny to me and good.
Something that just occurred to me is the name of the boat. Because I'm pretty sure whippoorwills only live in North America. So our international listeners might not know why it's called. That's just a type of bird. It's an interesting name. It's just a type of bird, and its name comes from the sound it makes. Although I don't think the sound it makes sounds anything like whippoorwill, but it's supposed to.
Does it sound like a paddle boat?
It's like... But yes, that's what it is. I figured we would mention that.
No, this is tornado. American only weather. American only birds.
I also just had to look up the Forbes Field in that quote because, like, the only one I know of was the Pittsburgh Pirates' old stadium. But apparently, the Topeka Airport used to be called Forbes Field when it was a Army Air Corps base.
Interesting. So that is the story part, but I do have some fun things that I found out after. So most of the press stuff I found all stopped in 2018 when these 2 bros in their mid-20s bought the boat.
The actual brothers, or like, are you describing their aesthetic?
Yes, no, 2 brothers. Let's see, one was like 28, one was 26.
This was not us. We didn't do this.
They bought the boat, and they basically, when asked why, they just said, because it's cool. It's got a paddle wheel, and no one has that. The older one, that would be the 28-year-old, was like, everyone thinks about retiring out on the on the ocean, but this is going to be our retired on the ocean, so we're going to be out on the lake. However, the newspaper articles all came out when they bought the boat, and no follow-ups were ever made.
Because it's haunted.
It's haunted.
It's haunted. So at first I was like, well, I guess that's all I know, until I double-checked the Wikipedia page, of all places, of this incident, and it says that the boat has been resurrected as under the name Host of Sparrows. And so I decided to go looking into that, and I found Host of Sparrows Facebook page. And I sent them a Facebook message saying, hi, I'm doing research on this boat. Is this the same boat that used to be called the Whippoorwill that was hit by this tornado? The guy said, yes, it is. And I was like, and I messaged back, I was like, cool, can I ask you some questions about it? Mainly, well, not mainly, but one thing I wanted to know was the beam. All the sources gave me links. Nobody would tell me how wide the boat was.
It's classified.
I was like, I feel like I want to know that.
I've occasionally found stories like that where it's like there'll be parts of the boat that are detailed and like repeated. It's like it's 80 feet long. Nothing has, how much water did it draw, or like it's some specific.
Yeah, I don't think I came
across. Available.
Yeah, I don't think I came across how much it weighed, or.
I have found their Twitter page. Oh no.
Oh no, I haven't looked at their Twitter page.
They haven't posted since 2023.
That's better than some oh no's on Twitter could be.
I was about to say, I was like, wait, are they right? Like,
yeah, like what?
I only say oh no because I think I figured out what their plan to do with it is.
Oh no.
So after I messaged the guy, asked him some questions, he said, yeah, you could call me. And so I called him. And so here is the story of what happened after 2018. So the guy who owns the boat now is a guy named Barclay Mead. On the phone, he seemed very cool. He was very accommodating and talkative and seemed very chill. And so what happened after the brothers bought the boat is they took it up to Lake Perry. They towed it on a truck. And basically it sat in their dry dock / marina for 8 years. We've all been guys in our mid-20s. We've all had ambitions bigger than our britches. Mm-hmm. Right? So they ended up not really doing anything with the boat. And the marina basically had told them, you need to get rid of this or we're going to burn it or something. I don't think burn it, but it's like, you need to get rid of this or we're going to get rid of it. And Mr. Mead apparently knows the guy who runs that place and offered to buy it. And he said, but if I buy it, can I keep it here for a while? And the guy was like, okay, sure. So he buys it. And I asked him, why'd you want to buy it? And he literally said a Facebook meme. I saw one of those memes where it was like, fuck it, we're all pirates, grab your crew. And he was like, you know what? And he's like a older-ish guy. And so he starts like, I started thinking about that. I was like, well, that'd be fun. And so he bought the boat, and they've since been converting it. And this is where they've been converting it into a pirate ship. A pirate ship with a paddle wheel. Now, the design looks pretty gnarly, or pretty interesting. It's like got a mast and little gunnels, and it still has this little paddle wheel. Let's see. He said when he bought it, he said it was like a walking on an RV. It was like walking on an old RV when he first bought it. They had took off the top deck and like replaced it with an RV roof. So Mead had to tear a bunch of shit off and basically rebuilt the boat. And what he told me the main thing he wants to do with it, in addition to they are going to like charter to take people out on like little nice cruises or whatever, parties and shit. But he said that he's doing work with not Make-A-Wish, but one of those kind of organizations. Mm-hmm. And what happens is when a kid gets a wish from one of those places, it's usually so much money that only the kid and like one or two other people can come. And what he wanted to do was basically 4 times a year so that once a quarter, basically let basically a Make-A-Wish kid bring like their whole family and come party out on the boat.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
And he added
It's
some
a cool
pretty
concept.
one, and also one thing he did to it was on either side of the boat he added these outrigger platforms on pontoons that could be lowered, which they're 25 feet each, so it would make the boat 50 feet wider. And these are supposed to serve as like little party decks.
It's like Ship of Theseus, but with a boat that killed 16 people
Yeah.
for no reason. It is cool though to see like hopefully some positive come out of.
Yeah, he seemed very
something.
sincere. I know we're kind of joking around and laughing. He seemed very sincere.
Yeah, it is cool to see something like that.
He said they were hoping to start this spring, full operations, but he said they're pushing that back to next year instead of rushing it.
Of the things you could do with your spare time and spare money, it's like thinking about groups like this that need attention, that maybe don't get it. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, he said he might possibly take it out into like the Missouri River and other places, which made me ask him, because I thought like, so who's certified? Like, does this boat has to be certified, right? Who's in charge of that? And for lakes like Pomona, which are like dams and stuff, the Army Corps of Engineers is the certifiers. But if you want to take it like out into the river, then you have to get your Coast Guard certification.
Interesting.
Apparently they've already got those. Other little tidbit, Mr. Meade was at they had a little model of the boat on a golf cart at the Kansas City Chiefs parade this year.
Nice.
The one where
the shooting happened.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That actually reminds me of a day that a student, I believe it was that shooting, the day it happened, one of my students had like seen the news or something and asked me if I saw the shooting. And I legitimately I said like, which one?
Yeah, you gotta be like, you're gonna have to be more specific, buddy.
I wasn't even thinking of it in like a cynical, like I can't even keep the shooting straight. There's like 3 of those in the news right now. Which one are you talking about?
Yeah.
That was eye-opening for them.
But yeah, so that's pretty much the story of the Whippoorwill and its new kind of life it's getting.
That's cool, especially with the firsthand, the interview or type stuff.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, so sources: Ottawa Journal, just Ottawa, Kansas, Ottawa Herald, the Topeka Capital Journal, Wichita Eagle, WIBW News. There's also an article on the Wayback Machine by a guy named Warren Sunkel, which has lots of detail. And there's a site called Tornado Talks, which also has a lot of detail about the incident. So that's where I correlated all of my information.
These are also like, I feel like these episodes that incorporate some sort of outside, not directly maritime element. They're usually good for getting attention from people who maybe don't normally listen to the show. Maybe they see it because, it's related to a tornado or the weather or something like that. So yeah, these are cool, I think, for hopefully getting stuff to new listeners.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing it, despite having to take some long breaks just because of gestures everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of us have been like that recently, especially the first half of the season so far. It's just like there's just usually it works out where if one of us is like really amped up and into the episode we're doing, the other one is sort of on the bottom of the seesaw. But like sometimes it works out where we both are just not super enthused at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it happens. Taking breaks is good because yeah, like we said in I think our last episode, like it is supposed to be fun. Like it's supposed to be something you're interested in doing and sharing. So yeah.
No, that was a fun episode.
We're not laughing at the dead.
What about you? Where can people see more from you?
So if you want to find me just being crazy on Twitter, I'm at Dolorous Nick, DOLOROUS Nick. It's a Game of Thrones reference. It's spelled like Dolores, I know.
We'll put it in the show notes also.
But yeah, if you just want to see me being unhinged and leftist on there, losing my mind, come join me. It's fun to be part of a few little communities like this one, though. This is the reason we keep Twitter around, right? So.
Absolutely.
Literally, yes, because otherwise there's not much usefulness to it. It just happens to be, well, like I explained to someone a while ago, it's like Twitter is much like the United States in that it sucks and it's full of Nazis, but it's where all my friends are.
Yeah. Yeah. It is literally all my friend. We're all the friends. Oh, well, because I promised to do this, and if you want to cut this in earlier, you can. Let me read out the names of the 15.
Yeah, do that.
people.
Yeah.
So there was Dr. Mariel L. Fuller, age 65. Charles Alton Griffin, 33. Carolyn Marie Lily Hartwich, 40. Donald Morgan Don Hawthorne, 35. Dr. Zubedaya Zinaro Isa, 55. Tina Elaine Kramer, 17. Mildred Sarah Baxter Lilly, 79. Mary Pamela Pam Nelson, 29. Judy K. Vines Patterson, 26. Unborn baby of Miss Judy Patterson. Dr. Sarah Rebecca Reed, 64. Dr. Norman Lewis Schwartz, 48. Grace Irene Kingsbury Vogel, 66. Norris Edward Weiss, or I guess it's Weiss. I've been doing too much German. Norris Edward Weiss, 47. Melissa Lee Missy Wright, 9. And Sandra Doreen Bogle Wright, 34.